dog waited 4 years for his family. But then a miracle happened, and soon after the story takes a shocking turn that will make you cry with emotion. Do you know those dogs that everyone finds, but nobody knows much about? That was the case of Marley. It was a black dog with white spots that lived in a crossroads, right in the middle of the road that connected the town with the mountains. He stayed there for 5 years. 5 whole years. Everyone who walked through that cross knew that Marley would be there. Always in the same place, sitting on his feet, as if he was waiting for something or someone. People began to notice his behavior. He never showed aggression to anyone. He just stayed there, calm but always alert. He seemed to observe every car passing by, every bicycle, every person walking. And you know what was the most curious? He welcomed everyone. If someone was sad, he would come closer, moving his tail, as if he wanted to say, "Everything is going to be fine." Some people even said that Marley was like a guardian of that place, taking care of those who passed by. Now I'll tell you a detail that moved those who looked. Nobody knew why Marley was there. She didn't have an owner. She didn't wear a necklace. And she didn't seem to belong to anyone in town either. It was as if she had chosen that cross for a reason that no one could understand. Some said she was waiting for someone who had never arrived. Others believed that she didn't want to leave the place for some important memory. And do you know what this caused in people? A mixture of curiosity and affection. Marley, although she was a street dog, he gained everyone's respect. It became part of the day-by-day of the town, a presence that everyone learned to admire. But what nobody knew was that this story had much more behind it, and you'll want to know what comes next. Marley was still there, firm on the cross, day after day. But as time went by, he began to change, and not in a good way. His fur, which was once beautiful and shiny, became opaque, lifeless. He looked thinner, as if he was eating little or even nothing for a few days. What caught the most attention was a wound on his leg that apparently hurt him a lot because he was getting more and more moved. The people in town began to realize. Some felt sorry for him, but others thought he was like that because he was a stray dog, as if it were something normal. Despite that, Marley never left the cross. He was still there, sitting, looking at the cars and the people passing by, as if he was expecting something important. It was as if he had a mission that no one could understand. Can you imagine what it is to see such a faithful dog, so determined, and at the same time notice that he was suffering? It was heartbreaking. But do you know what was incredible? Despite all that suffering, Marley did not lose his welcoming nature. If someone stopped, he moved his tail, tried to get closer, as if he wanted to say, "I'm here, you can count on me." However, in the background, Marley also seemed to be asking for help, but in a silent way, without complaining. It was difficult not to feel a knot in the chest when seeing it. Everyone knew that Marley needed help, but no one really did anything. It was like those things that one sees every day, but one does not realize how important they are. And little by little, Marley became that dog that everyone saw, but that seemed invisible. It was then that Claudia appeared in town. Was a young vet full of energy and with that bright look of who loves animals above all. Finally, Claudia managed to get him in her truck. "Now you're going to a safe place, friend," she said as she drove to the clinic. Upon arrival, Claudia began to take care of Marley with all the affection in the world. She cleaned her wound, applied medicines, bathed him and prepared a warm bed for him. It was as if she wanted to show him that she no longer had to suffer, that there was someone who really cared for him. Marley, although quiet, seemed to understand, as if he started to believe that he could trust a human again. But there was something that Claudia still didn't understand. Although she gave him all the care, Marley seemed restless. She ate, rested, let him treat him, but something bothered her. Her eyes, although calmer, were always attentive, as if she were still thinking about the cross. Claudia didn't know it, but she was just beginning to discover what made Marley so special. It wasn't just any dog, and, without realizing it, she was already involved in a much bigger story than I imagined. Before continuing, remember to like and subscribe to the channel if you love animals and their emotional stories. Despite all the care that Claudia was giving him, Marley did not seem completely comfortable in the clinic. She ate well, rested in the bed she had prepared, but she always had that distant look. It was as if she was not really there, as if something called her from another place. Claudia thought it was only a matter of time before she needed to adapt to the new environment. But one morning, when she went to check on Marley, he was gone. The clinic door had been left open for carelessness, and Marley took the opportunity. She escaped without leaving a trace. Claudia was desperate. She ran all over the town, called him by his name, asked the neighbors, but no one knew anything. Until a lady said, Claudia went there and there was Marley, sitting in the same place as always, as if she had never left. She looked at her, but she didn't move. It was as if she said, I know you want to help me, but this is my place. Claudia didn't understand why, after receiving food, careful if a safe place, she insisted on returning to the cross. She tried to take him back to the clinic and Marley accepted, but a few days later she escaped again. It was as if that cross was Marley's home. It seemed to have an emotional connection with the place that no one could explain. Intrigued, Claudia decided to change her strategy. She realized that forcing Marley to stay in the clinic was not the solution. Then she began to visit him at the cross every day. She brought food, water, and medicines, sat next to him, and tried to understand that he held him there. Why don't you want to get out of here, Marley? She asked him one day while caressing his head. Marley only looked at her with those deep eyes that seemed to keep secrets. She moved her tail, but of course, she did not give any answer. Claudia felt that there was something else in that story, something she needed to discover. The inhabitants of the town began to notice Claudia's effort. Some thought she was wasting time with a stray dog. Others, however, admired her dedication. But for Claudia, Marley was not just any dog, and she was determined to understand the reason. The most incredible thing is that, even after all the escapes and returns, Marley was more and more confident in Claudia. She no longer ran away from her when she saw her coming. She even seemed to wait for her, as if she knew that Claudia was her friend. But the mystery of the cross continued. Why didn't Marley leave there? Claudia was about to discover that this story had many more layers than she imagined. Claudia realized that, alone, she couldn't solve the mystery of Marley and her connection with the cross. She knew she needed help, but not only that. She wanted people to understand what that dog meant. It wasn't just any street dog. It was Marley, the guardian of the cross, and her story deserved to be known. Then she had an idea. Share Marley's story on social media. He took some pictures of him on the cross and wrote a moving text telling everything he knew until that moment. He spoke of how he was always in the same place, of the suffering he had faced, of the wound on the leg that she took care of every day, and above all, of the curiosity of why he insisted on returning to the cross. Does anyone know this dog? Claudia wrote in her publication. It is special, but it seems that she is waiting for something or someone. If you have any information, please let me know. Let's help Marley together. He posted the message in local groups in the region. To his surprise, the story received a lot of attention. The following days, people began to get involved. Some inhabitants of the town, who used to only look at Marley from afar, decided to visit him. They brought food, water, and even blankets for him. Children began to appear on the cross with cookies and toys, wanting to give affection to the famous dog. Moved by the story they had read in the networks, each visit was a mixture of curiosity and empathy. Marley, with his calm and friendly attitude, he received everyone. He moved his tail, he let himself be caressed, but never abandoned the cross. It was as if he were grateful for every gesture of kindness. But he said, I need to stay here. Claudia's initiative made him burn, and he no longer felt so alone. Now he had a community that cared for him, even if it was in a simple way. But beyond that, Claudia's publication began to bring answers. Some people commented that they had seen Marley before years ago, but nobody knew where he really came from. Others, who often passed by the cross, shared stories of how it seemed to have helped people, simply being there like a silent friend. But the most important thing was yet to come. Among so many people who saw the publication, there was someone who seemed to recognize Marley for real. And that would be the turning point in this story. Then, the story of Marley reached someone who seemed to have the answer to the mystery. Pedro, a truck driver from a neighboring town, was at home, browsing social media when he saw Claudia's post. He was paralyzed when he saw Marley's pictures. There was no doubt. That was Rex, his dog, who had disappeared years ago during one of his trips. Pedro took the phone immediately and called Claudia. His voice was a mixture of emotion and urgency. "I think I know that dog. It's very similar to Rex, my dog I lost 5 years ago. Where are you? I want to go there right now." Claudia felt a cold when she heard that. Could it be true? She didn't know what to think, but something in Pedro's tone gave her hope. The next day, Pedro arrived at the town. He was a simple-looking man, but his eyes were full of expectation and emotion. When he arrived at the cross and saw Marley, he couldn't hold back his tears. Rex yelled with his voice cut off. "Are you my friend?" He knelt near Marley, calling him by the name he used for the dog. However, Marley did not react as Pedro expected. He looked at him, bowed his head a little, but did not run towards him or move his tail with enthusiasm. It was as if he recognized him, but at the same time he was confused. Pedro began to tell his story to Claudia and some people in the town who were watching there. He explained that Rex was his dog and he accompanied him on his trips by truck. "Whenever I stopped somewhere, Rex was close, waiting for me to finish my deliveries. But one day he disappeared. I looked for him for weeks, but I never found him. I thought they had run him over or that someone had taken him." While Pedro was talking, Marley seemed to listen. His eyes were attentive, as if that voice brought him memories that he had kept deep inside. But even so, he did not seem anxious to get completely close to Pedro. Claudia watched everything closely, trying to understand what was happening. Pedro, on the other hand, was excited but also seemed a little distant. He said he was happy to have finally found Rex, but his attitude was not that of someone willing to take the dog home and take care of it as before. He even mentioned that his life was very agitated and that he could not give Marley the care he needed now. Claudia began to feel uncomfortable with the situation. Pedro seemed sincere when he talked about how much Rex cared about him in the past, but now he didn't seem prepared to assume responsibility for him. Marley, on the other hand, was calm, as if waiting to see what would happen. He didn't run towards Pedro, but he didn't show a complete rejection either. The doubt floated in the air. Was Marley really Rex? Should he return with Pedro or stay with Claudia? The story was far from ending, and it seemed that only Marley knew what the correct answer was. Pedro was still there, kneeling in front of Marley, calling the Rex with a voice full of emotion. But the reunion was not as he expected. Marley did not throw himself into his arms. He did not move his tail with joy as dogs usually do when they see someone they love. Instead, he stood still, looking at Pedro with an expression that seemed to say, "I recognize you, but I do not know if I can trust you again." Claudia watched everything carefully. There was something that did not fit. He felt that Marley was in conflict, as if he recognized Pedro, but he was also doubting. It was impossible not to notice how he approached with slow and cautious steps, as if he did not want to risk being hurt again. For Claudia, it was a clear sign that something in Marley's past made him suspicious of his former owner. Pedro, on the other hand, was genuinely excited, but his attitude was not that of someone completely committed to taking care of the dog. He told more about his story together. He said Rex was his inseparable companion on the travels, but he admitted that in that time his life was so agitated that he couldn't dedicate all the time he liked. He left him loose in the stops, and I think that's how he got lost. He explained with a tone that mixed guilt and resignation. Claudia began to ask him more direct questions. "Do you feel that you are ready to take care of him now? Marley has special needs. She needs attention, medical care, and a lot of love. Are you sure you can give him that?" Pedro hesitated before answering. "My life is still very busy. You know? I work all day and I don't know if I could give him what he needs. But he's my dog. I missed him for years." Those words lit an alarm in Claudia. He knew that, although Pedro had good intentions, Marley deserved more than an owner who didn't have time for him. During that conversation, Marley seemed increasingly inclined to stay close to Claudia. He lay down next to her, as if he was saying that was his place now. Pedro noticed this and tried to convince him. He called him by his previous name. He offered him a necklace, even tried to put on his necklace to take it. But Marley didn't give up. He took small steps back, hiding slightly behind Claudia. It was as if he was saying, "I don't want to go." This situation created a tense atmosphere. Claudia felt the pressure. She knew it wasn't just simply denying Pedro the opportunity to take Marley, but he couldn't ignore what he was seeing either. The connection between Marley and Pedro seemed broken, and the dog clearly trusted her more. Then Pedro made one last attempt. "Rex, come on. Buddy, I'll take you home." He tried to carry him, but Marley grinned softly. It wasn't an aggressive grunt, but enough for Pedro to understand that the dog wasn't comfortable. He immediately released him and stood up, with his hands on his waist, looking defeated. "I don't think he wants to go with me," said Pedro with a low voice. It was a difficult moment for him, and Claudia noticed it. Pedro was divided between the joy of having found his dog and the sadness of realizing that something had changed between them. Claudia, with her usual calm, tried to relieve the tension. "Pedro, maybe Marley needs more time to adapt. You can visit him here, spend more time with Eli. Who knows, rebuild that confidence." Pedro felt, but something in his eyes showed that he had already made a decision. He said goodbye to Marley with affection. He promised to return soon. But deep down, Claudia knew that he would probably not return. For Pedro, that was the end of a chapter. For Marley and Claudia, it was the beginning of something new. Marley stayed there next to Claudia while Pedro was moving away. When the man's truck disappeared on the road, Marley lay down at Claudia's feet, as if saying, "I chose you." Claudia felt a mixture of relief and responsibility. Now, more than ever, she knew that Marley was under her care. She didn't see him as a burden, but as an important part of her life. There were still many questions to be answered, but something was certain. Marley was no longer alone, and Claudia would do everything possible to make sure that she never felt abandoned again. After the complicated reunion with Pedro, something was clear to all those who were there. Marley had made his decision. He could have recognized Pedro, the one who one day was his owner. But his heart was already in another place. For Marley, Claudia was much more than a friend. She represented security, care, and love, everything she seemed to have lost over the years. However, Pedro did not want to give up so easily. He returned to town a few days later, this time deciding to take Marley home. He arrived with a new necklace, a bag of expensive food, and even tried to talk to Claudia, assuring that he was now prepared to take care of Marley. "I know I made mistakes in the past, but I want a second chance. He's my dog," he said, almost begging. Claudia, although she felt empathy for Pedro, knew that the decision was not hers. It was Marley's. Then she proposed a test. "Let Marley decide. If she wants to go with you, I won't stop her. But if she chooses to stay, you must respect her." Pedro accepted, although with some reluctance. They went together to the cross, where Marley was lying down in her usual place, observing the movement around her. When she saw Claudia, she immediately got up and moved her tail. Pedro, on her part, knelt down and called him, "Rex, come here, friend." He opened his arms, waiting for Marley to run towards him. But Marley didn't move. He stayed still for a few seconds, looking at Pedro as if he were evaluating the situation. Then, to everyone's surprise, he turned around and walked towards Claudia. He sat next to her and leaned his head on her leg. The message was clear: he had chosen to stay. Pedro kept silent for a moment, trying to process what had just happened. He passed his hand over his face, he sighed deeply and got up. "I understand, now I trust you more," he said, with a tone of sadness but also of acceptance. "I just want the best for him. If that means he should stay with you, then I will respect him." Claudia, moved, was grateful for Pedro's understanding. She knew it was not easy for him to resign, but she also felt it was the right decision. Pedro said goodbye to Marley with a last caress on the head and told her, "Take good care of him. He deserves it." When Pedro left, Marley seemed calmer, as if a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. He lay down next to Claudia and let out a long sigh, almost as if saying, now everything is fine. For Claudia, that moment was a confirmation that she had won not only Marley's trust, but also her heart. From then on, Marley's life began to change. She no longer needed to stay at the crossroad all the time, although she still liked to go from time to time. Claudia respected that and always accompanied him, making sure he was safe. It was as if Marley wanted to say goodbye to the place that had been his home for so many years, but at his own pace and in his own way. Now Marley had more than one home. He had a real family, and although Pedro promised to contribute with the veterinary expenses and did so for a while, he never returned to the town. For Claudia and Marley, life continued with certainty. They had met at the right time to heal the wounds of the other and start a new stage together. After Pedro agreed to leave Marley under Claudia's care, something changed in the people's hearts. Marley, who was previously just the dog on the cross, now was officially Claudia's dog. The decision brought a feeling of relief for everyone, especially for Marley, who finally seemed free to start again. Claudia was in charge of formalizing Marley's adoption. She took him to the vet for a full checkup and was assured that he would have all the vaccines a day. She bought a new necklace with a plaque that said, Marley, Claudia's home. When he put the necklace on, Marley moved her tail and looked at her as if saying, now I am really yours. The town also welcomed Marley in a special way. She was no longer just Claudia's dog. She became a symbol of resilience and love for the entire community. People continued to visit the cross, but they no longer wore only blankets and food. They carried affection, stories, and even games. Children loved to throw balls so that Marley would catch them. And he, more than sure, ran after them like a happy puppy. Claudia and Marley became inseparable. She took him everywhere, to the clinic, to walks through town, even to small trips to explore trails and waterfalls in the region. Marley, who used to seem trapped in the past, began to explore the world with joy. But even so, he still liked to visit the old cross from time to time. It was as if he wanted to honor the place that had been his home for so many years. It was during one of those visits that Claudia noticed something special. Marley was no longer going to the cross for need or despair. She was going like a visitor, a dog that now knew she had a home and was safe. She sat down for a few minutes, watched the movement as she did before, but then she got up and looked at Claudia, as if saying, we can go now. I know I have a place to go back to. Marley became much more than a rescued dog. He became a local hero. Claudia used her story to inspire other people to take care of the animals abandoned in the village. She organized adoption campaigns, fairs to raise funds for street animals, and little by little, she transformed the community into a more welcoming place for animals that, like Marley, needed a second chance. Marley, on the other hand, seemed to know how special she was. He walked through the town with an air of who had finally found his place in the world. And, for Claudia, every day by her side was a proof that love and patience can transform lives, both that of a dog and that of a person. Marley was no longer the forgotten dog in the crossroads. Now it was Marley, the guardian who found his family. His story, full of challenges and surpassments, became an inspiration for all who knew him. In the end, Marley not only found a home, he also helped Claudia and the people rediscover what really matters. Take care, love, and never give up on those who need us. And so, Marley continued to live her new life, with Claudia by her side, like a true family. The crossing that once was her refuge now was just a reminder of where it all started and a proof that, sometimes, fate only waits for the right time to show us the way. Thanks for watching the video until the end. Remember to leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and comment your opinion about this story.